The chamber was tense before, but now it was frozen. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady, and delivered the words that no one expected, the words that sliced through the pretense like a blade. "Barron is your son." The air shifted. You could feel it. For a moment, no one moved. Then the collective gasp broke, rolling across the room like thunder. Reporters' fingers clattered against keyboards, cameras tilted, flashes ignited. Ivanka Trump's smile faltered just for a second, but in that second, the mask she had worn so carefully cracked wide open. She tried to hold it together, lips pressing into a thin line, but the silence betrayed her. Every eye was fixed on her. Every breath in the chamber belonged to Jasmine Crockett. This wasn't politics as usual. This wasn't a polite sparring match between dynasties and their critics. This was humiliation in real time, arrogance undone by a single sentence. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The strength of her calmness was louder than any shout. The line landed, and the chamber knew this was history. People leaned forward in their seats, straining to catch the next word. Some smiled, unable to hide their delight. Others whispered, eyes darting, stunned at the audacity. It wasn't just an accusation. It was revelation. One of those moments that rewrites the narrative in an instant. Ivanka's perfectly curated composure flickered into panic, then into defiance. But it was too late. The moment had been seized. The spell of dynasty had been broken, shattered under the weight of 7 words. And as Ivanka's silence deepened, the meaning of those words swelled. It wasn't about gossip. It wasn't about family rumor. It was about power, entitlement, and the dynasty that believed it could never be questioned. Crockett had proved otherwise. Outside, America was already watching. Phones buzzed, alerts lit up screens, and social media feeds erupted with disbelief. People asked one another the same thing. Did you hear what she just said? Because what followed in the next 30 seconds would not only rattle Ivanka Trump, it would ripple through the entire country. A confrontation that no one could look away from. A drama destined to be replayed again and again. And just when it seemed the shock could not grow deeper, the stakes of this clash revealed themselves, pulling the audience into a story that was only beginning. Asterisk to understand why Jasmine Crockett's words mattered. You have to understand the room she was standing in. This wasn't just another chamber filled with speeches destined to be forgotten. It was a battlefield, dressed up in velvet chairs and polished wood, where dynasties believed they could bend truth into silence. And Ivanka Trump, walking into that setting, carried herself like royalty, stepping into a court she already owned. She had every reason to feel that way. For years, the Trump name had commanded headlines, dictated the narrative, and blurred the line between politics and spectacle. Her father's shadow loomed large, and Ivanka had learned to weaponize that aura of inevitability. She expected deference. She expected respect handed to her, not earned. To her, this chamber was just another stage where dynasty could put on its show. But Crockett wasn't interested in putting on a show. She represented something sharper, something far more dangerous to dynastic arrogance. She represented the dignity of ordinary Americans who had no golden safety net, who couldn't lean on a last name to carve their path. Crockett was a woman shaped by service, sharpened by the courtroom, and driven by the knowledge that real power comes not from entitlement, but from resilience. So when Ivanka leaned in, lacing her words with the smugness of someone convinced the story was already written, she expected Crockett to fold into the script. That was the playbook. Trump arrogance on offense, everyone else on defense. The smirk said it all. She believed Crockett would blink, stumble, retreat. After all, what challenger had ever truly pierced the dynasty's armor? Yet this wasn't about trading barbs or political theater. This was about exposing the myth that dynasty equals destiny. Crockett's eyes told a different story. One of patience, one of calculation, one of knowing that the right word at the right moment could bring the whole illusion crashing down. The stakes weren't just personal. They were national. This wasn't Ivanka versus Jasmine. It was dynasty versus dignity. On one side, a family that had turned politics into inheritance, wielding privilege like a weapon. On the other, a representative forged in struggle. carrying with her the voices of those who had been dismissed, diminished, told to stay in their place. And that's why Crockett's line hit with such force. It wasn't merely about family, it was about hypocrisy. For years, Ivanka had polished her image, presenting herself as the calm, untouchable daughter of power, immune to scandal. But the truth is fragile when it's built on entitlement. Crockett didn't just find the crack, she shattered it wide open. Every gasp in that room carried meaning. Every whisper was more than gossip. It was recognition. Recognition that the balance of power had shifted in real time. Crockett had taken control of the narrative Ivanka thought she owned. For the first time in that chamber, the Trump name wasn't untouchable, it was vulnerable. Imagine being in the crowd that day. You would have felt the shift in your chest, the electric jolt that something unprecedented had just occurred. It was more than Crockett was validation. Validation for every person who ever felt bulldozed by the arrogance of dynasty. Validation that truth could still slice through the thickest armor of privilege. And yet, what made it all the more remarkable was Crockett's composure. No theatrics, no raised voice, just steady conviction. The quiet confidence of someone who knew she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for millions. Every syllable reminded the room that real authority comes not from inheritance, but from integrity. Ivanka's miscalculation was fatal. She thought Crockett would play by the old rules. She thought dynasty could intimidate dignity. But Crockett didn't just refuse to play, she rewrote the rules on the spot. What America saw that day wasn't merely a clash of personalities. It was a collision of worldviews. And Crockett's words didn't just land on Ivanka, they landed on an entire system, built on the belief that some names deserve to tower above others. That is why the moment mattered. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about stripping arrogance bare and reminding everyone in that chamber, everyone watching beyond it, that truth doesn't bow to dynasty. And just when Ivanka thought she held the upper hand, Crockett turned the entire room upside down. Ivanka Trump built her brand on polish. To the casual observer, she was the composed daughter, the poised businesswoman, the whisper of calm in a family defined by chaos. She walked into rooms with an elegance that suggested untouchability, as if she were floating above the roughness of politics, immune to scandal by virtue of charm and designer perfection. But beneath that veneer was something far less graceful: entitlement. Her rise wasn't built on grit, sweat, or merit. It was a gilded elevator ride up the tower her father constructed, where the family name, substituted for effort and access, substituted for talent. She marketed herself as an entrepreneur, yet her ventures were stitched together by nepotism. Her White House title wasn't earned through years of public service, but gifted through bloodline. Dynasty over dignity. Privilege over service. Asterisk. She perfected the art of silence when it suited her. During the years of her father's corruption, cruelty, and chaos, Ivanka rarely raised her voice. She wanted the glow of power without the burden of accountability. When immigrant families were torn apart at the border, her Instagram gleamed with pictures of her own children, staged in soft lighting and pastel tones. When democracy trembled, she was there in the background, smiling, untouched, always adjacent to power, never responsible for its abuses. That's the contradiction of Ivanka's carefully curated image. She sold herself as modern, independent, even feminist, yet her privilege came entirely from the dynasty she never questioned. She cultivated the language of empowerment, while embodying the oldest story in politics, family name opening doors for her that remained shut for everyone else. Asterisk, her entitlement wasn't loud like her father's. It was quieter, more insidious. She carried it in the expectation that others would bend, that respect would be automatic, that her words would carry weight simply because she was Ivanka. It was arrogance in a silk glove, but arrogance nonetheless. And the danger of arrogance, especially the polished kind, is that it looks unshakable till the right truth exposes how brittle it really is. Because make no mistake, Ivanka's image was glass. Smooth, reflective, dazzling to those who glanced quickly, but glass all the same. Fragile, breakable. One sharp strike, and the illusion could splinter beyond repair. She lived by the dynasty's shield, but that shield was always thinner than it appeared. Her opportunism revealed the cracks. Whenever public opinion swayed, she tried to pivot. To reframe herself as the moderate voice, the one who whispered reason into her father's ear. But even that role was a performance. A mask worn for credibility while benefiting from the very corruption she pretended to soften. It was politics as branding and Instagram filter applied to dynasty arrogance. To the world, she represented the polished face of Trumpism, privilege without the shouting, entitlement without the vulgarity. But to those who looked deeper, she was proof of how dynasty rewrites the rules. How privilege cloaks itself in charm to avoid scrutiny. She was the polished shield for an empire built on excess and ego. And that's what made Jasmine Crockett's presence so dangerous. Crockett didn't play by the dynasty's script. She didn't bow to the polish, didn't cower before the entitlement. Where others saw glamour, Crockett saw hypocrisy. Where others hesitated, Crockett pressed forward. And when entitlement meets truth, the result is never subtle. Ivanka believed her image was untouchable. She believed her poise was armor. But armor only works if it's forged from strength. Ivanka's was forged from appearances, from silence, from the assumption that no one would dare to strike. She mistook polish for power. What she failed to see was that power without substance cannot survive confrontation. And in that chamber, in that moment, she was about to meet someone, unafraid to test just how fragile her image truly was. Because all it takes is one line, one strike, one truth to shatter glass. And that truth was about to arrive in the most humiliating way possible. Jasmine Crockett never walked into politics as a legacy. She wasn't handed a gilded path or a famous last name that cleared obstacles before they appeared. Her rise was earned the way millions of Americans understand life must be earned through grit, persistence, and the courage to stand firm even when the odds tilt heavily against you. Her story begins far from marble, halls and dynastic circles of influence. Crockett grew up in a world that demanded toughness, not as a performance, but as survival. She saw firsthand how laws affected real families, how inequality wasn't an abstract concept, but a lived experience. She understood that when power is abused, it doesn't wound the privileged, it wounds the vulnerable. That awareness shaped her, sharpening her into someone who wouldn't just speak about justice but would fight tooth and nail for it. In the courtroom, she made her name as a fighter. She wasn't the type to shrink back when facing arrogant prosecutors or well-funded adversaries. She studied hard, argued harder, and defended clients who couldn't buy influence or spin their reputations through media. Every trial was a battle between those who assumed authority, was their birthright, and those who needed someone to defend their dignity. Over and over, Crockett proved that toughness didn't require cruelty, and fairness didn't require weakness. Those years forged her style, direct, unapologetic, and unafraid of confrontation. She wasn't reckless. She was precise. When others shouted to show strength, Crockett listened, waited, then struck with a line that cut deeper than volume ever could. That calmness was her power. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about conviction, the kind that doesn't shake when met with arrogance. Her refusal to bow wasn't just professional, it was personal. She came from the same world as the workers, immigrants, and single parents who felt invisible in America's power games. When she spoke, she carried their weight with her. She wasn't pretending to know struggle. She had lived beside it. That authenticity made her dangerous to dynasties that thrived on illusion. Every step she took in public service reflected that grounding. She didn't dress her campaigns in false promises. She talked about fairness as if it were oxygen, something every American deserved, but too many were being deprived of. She fought not to elevate herself, but to lift the voices drowned out by privilege. And that's why people trusted her. She wasn't polished to the point of emptiness. She was real. What set her apart was the fire that came from being underestimated. In halls where dynasty expected silence, Crockett brought resistance. When arrogance sneered, she smirked back. She carried herself like someone who knew she had already walked through tougher storms than any insult could conjure. That unshakable core terrified opponents because it meant she couldn't be bullied. And that was the essence of Jasmine. Crockett, She embodied the America that refused to bow. For immigrants who worked double shifts, for single mothers juggling 3 jobs, for workers watching billionaires rewrite the rules to their advantage, it's proof that resilience could still take the stage. That dignity could still stand tall against dynasty. When she rose in politics, critics called her sharp, confrontational, even dangerous. But her supporters knew what those words really meant. She was effective. She was unwilling to play the game of soft deference to privilege. She didn't step around arrogance, she went through it. That ferocity wasn't anger, it was clarity. And clarity is unstoppable when wielded by someone who isn't afraid of consequence. Crockett's fire wasn't born of ambition for its own sake. It was born of empathy. She had sat across from clients who couldn't pay, neighbors who couldn't breathe under crushing systems, friends who knew the pain of being overlooked. That empathy hardened into resolve. Every time Dynasty flexed its privilege, it wasn't just about power, it was about real lives being ignored. She carried those lives with her into every chamber, every confrontation. That's what made her unique in this clash with Ivanka Trump. Dynasty expected opponents to falter, to self-censor, to defer. But Crockett had no dynasty to appease, no privilege to protect, no family empire to polish. She had only her integrity and her fire, and that was more than enough. Her toughness in the courtroom became toughness in debate. She learned to listen with surgical patience, to let arrogance expose itself, and then to answer with a strike so undeniable that even the privileged couldn't recover. That's not recklessness, it's strategy. It's the strategy of someone who knows that the truth, delivered with composure, can't be dismissed. Crockett represented a generational shift. She wasn't playing the game of dynasty politics. She was rewriting the rules. In her, Americans saw themselves not the curated perfection of privilege, but the imperfect, relentless grind of people who rise despite the odds. That resonance gave her words gravity. When she spoke, it wasn't just Crockett, it was every person who ever felt erased by entitlement. And so, when Ivanka Trump smirked across the chamber, armed with the arrogance of dynasty, she expected the room to bend. She expected her polish to silence opposition, her name to command deference. But she wasn't facing deference. She was facing fire. Jasmine Crockett wasn't intimidated by the dynasty's glow. She wasn't distracted by the image of untouchability. She had built her career on stripping illusion away, exposing arrogance for what it was. And when the moment came, she didn't blink. She struck with the precision of someone who knew the weight of her words. Her fire was the weapon, her composure the blade. And in that chamber, with America watching, she would prove that dignity could pierce dynasty, and truth could topple entitlement. So when Ivanka smirked, Crockett didn't flinch, she struck. Asterisk, the chamber was no longer a room of polite exchanges. It had become an arena. The stakes weren't simply about policies or programs, they were about dominance, about who could command the space. And in that contest, Ivanka Trump believed herself untouchable. She leaned forward across the polished wood, her voice smooth, deliberate, like a queen descending from her throne. "You know, Congresswoman," she began, letting the title drip with condescension, "leadership isn't about loudness, it's about legacy. Some of us don't need to shout to be heard. Our names already speak for themselves." A murmur swept through the chamber. Ivanka wasn't just making a point. She was reminding everyone of her dynasty, her last name, her perceived inevitability. Her smile was the smirk of someone who believed the fight was already won. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat still, hands folded, eyes trained on Ivanka like a seasoned fighter waiting for the opponent to overextend. She knew arrogance when she saw it, and she knew arrogance always left an opening. Ivanka pressed further. "You've made a career out of criticizing others," she said, her tone tightening, her chin tilting upward. "But what exactly have you built? What have you created?" "My family has built towers, companies, movements. You, meanwhile, build noise. History won't remember noise." A few in the gallery gasped. The insinuation was clear. Ivanka was placing dynasty above service, privilege above grit. She thought the jab would sting, thought it would weaken Crockett standing in the eyes of those listening. But Crockett only leaned in slightly, her voice calm, steady, like steel beneath velvet. "Noise?" she asked, letting the word hang in the air. "You think speaking truth to power is noise? You think standing up for the people who've been ignored is noise?" Her voice carried weight, drawing the attention of even those who had been whispering at the edges of the room. Ivanka, sensing she was being challenged in a way she hadn't expected, narrowed her eyes. She doubled down, her tone sharper, each word like a blade meant to cut. "My point is simple," she said. "Leadership is proven by family, by legacy, by the strength you inherit and pass on. Some of us were raised for this. Others are. Trying too hard to climb into rooms they don't belong in?" That last phrase landed heavy. The arrogance wasn't even veiled anymore. The suggestion was unmistakable. Crockett didn't belong. It was an attack not just on her politics, but on her very right to stand in that chamber. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, a few shocked laughs, and the undeniable tension of lines being crossed. All eyes swung back to Jasmine Crockett. Would she recoil? Would she fire back in anger? Instead, she sat taller. Her calm didn't break. The silence she held became louder than Ivanka's arrogance. And when she finally spoke, it was with the precision of someone sharpening a blade. "You think belonging comes from bloodlines," Crockett said. "But belonging comes from service. From showing up for the people who put you here. Not from a last name. Not from an inheritance. And certainly not from arrogance." The gallery stirred. Heads turned. Even those who had been quietly siding with Ivanka were beginning to shift in their seats. Because Crockett wasn't just countering, she was exposing. Ivanka, unsettled by the calmness, tried again. She forced a smirk, tilting her head with mock amusement. "Oh, Jasmine," she said, feigning pity. "You keep talking about service as though it makes you superior. But let's be honest. Service doesn't rewrite history. Service doesn't build dynasties. And service doesn't give you power. Family does. That was her mistake. That was the overreach. Because in attempting to elevate her family, Ivanka had opened the very door Crockett had been waiting for. Jasmine didn't move right away. She let the words echo. Let Ivanka's arrogance fill every corner of the room. And then, with a tone so even it cut sharper than any shout, she delivered the first cut. "Family, you say? You think family is what defines power? Then let's talk about family." The chamber froze. Every set of eyes snapped back to Jasmine. Her gaze was steady, her timing deliberate. Ivanka shifted in her seat. Suddenly aware that the conversation had veered into dangerous territory. But it was too late. The trap had been set. Crockett leaned forward just slightly, her voice dropping into a register that forced the entire room to listen closer. "You've built your whole identity on a name. But names don't protect the truth. And the truth is," the silence was deafening. Journalists in the back poised their pens. Aides leaned forward wide-eyed. Every camera seemed to zoom in at once. "You're about to be reminded that family can also be the source of your greatest humiliation." The gallery erupted in whispers. Ivanka's smile faltered, and Jasmine Crockett's eyes didn't waver. Transitioned cliffhanger. Asterisk, the chamber had gone still, a silence so taut you could almost hear the shuffling of nerves. Ivanka had leaned in, smug, certain her last remark had cornered Jasmine Crockett. The smirk still clung to her lips, brittle but proud. That's when Crockett leaned forward, her eyes locked on Ivanka's, and spoke the line that detonated the room. "Barron, is your son?" The words didn't just echo, they detonated. First came the pause. An unnatural, suspended silence. A split second where no one breathed, no one shifted, no one dared to break the spell. Even the cameras, humming and blinking red, seemed to freeze. Then came the faces. Ivanka's first. Her polished composure flickered. For just a beat, the mask cracked. A faint tremor passed through her smile. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as though calculating whether to deny, dismiss, or deflect. And then the crowd. Gasps rippled like a wave through the gallery. Some jaws dropped, others broke into sly smirks, and a few aides quickly bent their heads, pretending to scribble notes just to hide their grins. Journalists' fingers flew across keyboards, typing furiously, as if history itself was unraveling in real time. In one corner, staffer muttered under their breath, "Not softly enough. Did she just..." Oh my God. Crockett didn't flinch. She let the moment breathe. She let Ivanka's silence dig its own grave. And then, calmly, she pressed forward. "You talk about family as if it's a crown," Crockett said, her voice sharp but steady, each word deliberate. "You wave legacy around as if it's earned. But you've built your life on two things: hiding behind a name and hiding from the truth." Murmurs buzzed louder. A few chuckles broke out in the back row, quickly muffled. Crockett leaned in further, refusing to break eye contact with Ivanka. "Let's be very clear. Americans don't care about your bloodline. They don't care about your gilded towers or your hand-me-down privilege. What they care about is honesty. What they care about is dignity. And what they see now," she gestured around the chamber, "is arrogance finally meeting accountability." The chamber shook with reactions. Aides exchanged frantic glances. Phones lit up in the gallery, live tweeting each syllable. Somewhere hashtags were already taking shape. Hashtag Barron is your son. Hashtag Crockett vs Ivanka. Crockett didn't stop. She pressed the wound. "You thought you could walk in here and intimidate me with dynasty? But dynasty is nothing without truth. And the truth is, power built on silence is no power at all. It's a cage. And tonight, you've been caught inside your own." Ivanka's hand twitched against the desk. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, her usual poise had fractured. Her eyes darted, searching for an escape hatch that wasn't there. Crockett, sensing the weakness, pivoted to the audience. She raised her voice, not to shout, but to ensure every syllable carried to the farthest corner. "This is what happens when arrogance meets accountability. This is what happens when privilege thinks it can bully dignity. And this is what happens." She pointed deliberately back at Ivanka. "When someone mistakes inheritance for respect, applause broke out in pockets. Not loud, not coordinated, but real. A rush of validation. The kind of applause that's half forbidden, half unstoppable." Security guards shifted uneasily, but the sound had already filled the air. Meanwhile, Ivanka's composure was collapsing in slow motion. She tried to form words. "This is absurd. This is ridiculous." But the lines came out brittle, defensive, lacking the sheen of confidence. Crockett cut over her effortlessly. "Absurd? What's absurd is thinking the American people will forever bow to a family name. What's absurd is believing that silence can erase hypocrisy. What's absurd, Ms. Trump? It's mistaking your dynasty for destiny." The room erupted again. Murmurs, gasps, and a wave of side eyes all trained on Ivanka. Even some of her usual defenders avoided her gaze, willing to be seen tethered to the sinking ship. Crockett didn't just strike, she layered. She painted the hypocrisy in bold strokes. While ordinary Americans work 2 jobs just to pay rent, you talk about legacy. While mothers struggle to raise children without support, you talk about inheritance. And while families across this country cling to each other through hardship, you treat family as a brand, as a prop, as a weapon. The words weren't just sharp, they were damning. Because they weren't about gossip, they were about values. And the chamber knew it by now. Social media outside those walls was exploding. Tweets flew. Did Jasmine Crockett just say Barron is your son to Ivanka's face? Crockett didn't just clap back, she nuked the room. This is why dynasty politics terrifies them. One line of truth. And the empire crumbles. The hashtags trended. Memes were already being born. One showed a crumbling golden tower with the caption, "Legacy can't protect you from truth." Back inside, Crockett tightened her focus. She drove in the final blow. "You said service doesn't build dynasties. You're right. It doesn't, but service builds something bigger. It builds trust. It builds community. It builds a country." And that's why this moment matters. Because America doesn't need another dynasty. America needs dignity. Ivanka slumped back slightly, her smile gone. The retreat wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was quiet. Her silence screamed louder than any rebuttal could. She had no counter, no shield, no weapon left. And Jasmine Crockett sat steady, her fire undimmed. The chamber now orbiting her gravity. The knockout had landed. For all Ivanka's privilege, for all her carefully constructed image, for all her dynasty's arrogance, one sharp truth had cracked it wide open. And yet, Crockett's voice carried the reminder that hung heavy over the chamber. This isn't just about one family. This is about every arrogant dynasty that thinks it can write the rules, while ordinary Americans pay the price. Tonight, that arrogance got called out. And tomorrow. The people will remember who had the courage to say it. The crowd's reaction was thunderous now, clapping, cheering, some standing despite the attempts to restore order. Cameras caught every angle. Ivanka, diminished, stared ahead, her silence damning her more than denial ever could. Crockett had delivered the mic drop, and she had done it with precision, purpose, and poise. The chamber would never forget it. The nation would never forget it. And Ivanka Trump would never escape it. But the story didn't end in that chamber. It was only beginning. Asterisk. The chamber had barely settled when the outside world erupted. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop were everywhere. Phones in the gallery had caught every angle, the sharpness of her delivery. The flicker of panic across Ivanka's face, the stunned hush before the crowd's roar. And the internet did what it always does. It turned a 30-second exchange into a cultural. Earthquake Twitter, or what some still stubbornly called X, lit up first. Hashtag Crockett Crush shot up the trending board, followed quickly by hashtag Dynasty Down. One viral post read, "Never thought I'd see someone slice through Trump arrogance in real time." Jasmine Crockett just gave America a new hero. Another, "Forget Dynasty." Tonight was dignity. Memes followed within the hour. One showed a golden tower splitting down the middle with Crockett's silhouette walking through the crack. Another spliced Ivanka's stunned reaction with a boxing bell sound effect. Round over. Knockout. Reaction videos spread like wildfire. TikTok creators replayed the line with dramatic music overlays. One popular edit looped Crockett's words, "Barron is your son," over pounding bass. Each repeat synced with Ivanka's frozen expression. Late-night comedians wasted no time joking that Crockett didn't just throw shade. She cut the lights on dynasty politics. News anchors on every major network ran the clip in prime time. The Chiron beneath the footage read. When arrogance met its match, analysts dissected every frame, Ivanka's micro-expressions, Crockett's timing, the audience's gasps. A CNN commentator declared, "This was not just political theater. This was a rare moment where truth punctured the bubble of entitlement. Even outlets normally allergic to praise for progressive figures couldn't ignore it." A conservative columnist admitted, "Whatever you think of Crockett's politics." The composure she showed under pressure was extraordinary. She looked unshaken. Ivanka looked rattled. The ripple effect spread further. Community leaders began quoting Crockett in speeches. High school debate teams shared the video as inspiration. One teacher tweeted, "Showed my students today. Lesson: power without honesty collapses when challenged by courage." Instagram feeds flooded with fan art. Stylized posters of Crockett with the words "dignity over dynasty." A popular illustration depicted her standing tall, microphone in hand, while golden walls crumbled behind her. And it wasn't just supporters. Even neutral commentators, the ones who often sat carefully on the fence, found themselves compelled to weigh in. One independent podcaster summed it up, "This wasn't about party lines. It was about the clash of values, inherited privilege versus earned respect. And on that stage, respect won." Meanwhile, Ivanka's allies scrambled. Statements were drafted, denials whispered, spin machines fired up. But the problem wasn't Crockett anymore. The problem was the clip. The image of Ivanka blinking in stunned silence was everywhere. It's unstoppable, immortalized as the moment her carefully curated invincibility cracked. Crockett herself said little. A single tweet, simple but devastating, carried her stance. Service greater than dynasty. Always. It was retweeted 1 million times in 24 hours by the end of the week. Polls showed a subtle but undeniable shift. Crockett's recognition skyrocketed, her approval among young voters surged, and Ivanka's numbers slid. The confrontation had broken through, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as a story about courage. And yet, as the headlines burned and the hashtags raged, something deeper stirred beneath the noise. Because this wasn't just about one exchange, or even about Ivanka herself. This was about America's hunger for leaders who refused to bow to arrogance. It was about the satisfaction of watching dynasty meet its reckoning. It was about the hope that dignity, once spoken out loud, could ripple far beyond the chamber walls. But beyond the headlines, this moment carried a deeper lesson. Asterisk, when the frenzy faded and the hashtags slowed, one voice cut through the noise, Jasmine Crockett's own. She stood before reporters days later, steady as ever, and clarified what so many had missed in the drama. It was never about family gossip, she said. It was about America's dignity. The room hushed again, though this time not out of shock, but out of respect. Crockett wasn't chasing scandal. She was pointing to something larger, something timeless. Because this wasn't about who belonged to whom, it was about what America deserved. She framed the moment with simplicity. Service over dynasty. Truth over arrogance. Those 4 words carried more weight than 100 talking points. Service meant sweat, sacrifice, and showing up for people who rarely had a voice. Dynasty meant entitlement, shortcuts, and power handed down like heirlooms. Truth meant clarity, accountability, courage. Arrogance meant lies wrapped in polish, silence masquerading as strength. And in that chamber, those forces had collided. What Crockett reminded the nation was that dignity is not inherited, it's earned. No crown, no title, no last name could protect arrogance from the sharp edge of truth. America was founded on the rejection of dynasties, the defiance of kings and queens. And here, centuries later, the same spirit had resurfaced in a modern voice, reminding us that no dynasty, however gilded, was immune to the people's demand for honesty. Her words rippled far beyond politics. Teachers repeated them in classrooms. Parents told them to their children as lessons. Workers repeated them in break rooms. Truth over arrogance. Service over dynasty. It became a kind of shorthand, motto for the America so many still believed in. And Crockett didn't let it end with the chamber or the cameras. She insisted the lesson was not about her, not about Ivanka, but about all of us. About the courage to speak, even when silence seems safer. About the faith that fairness can still win out over manipulation. About the reminder that dignity isn't fragile. It's the one thing that can outlast every insult. Every headline, every dynasty. Because arrogance may look strong. It may dress in gold, smile for cameras, and command attention. But arrogance is brittle. And when truth presses against it, arrogance always cracks. In her closing words, Crockett gave America not just a takedown, but a promise. No last name will ever be bigger than the truth. Not here. Not in the country we love. Because in America, dignity belongs to the people, and it will always outshine dynasty. The line spread everywhere, played as both warning and anthem. Commentators called it a new chapter in the tradition of political mic drops. Ordinary people called it something simpler. Hope, cinematic voice-over tone, and that was the deeper lesson. The one written not in gossip but in grit. Arrogance can demand silence, but dignity will always find its voice. Barron is your son. It wasn't just a line. It was the strike that shattered entitlement, the truth that split arrogance wide open for all to see. In that chamber, dynasty's armor cracked, and dignity stood unshaken. Jasmine Crockett walked in as a representative, but she walked out as something greater, a reminder that America doesn't bow to last names, it bows only to truth. Ivanka, once polished and untouchable, left diminished, smaller than the myth she had built around herself. One woman's composure had exposed an empire of arrogance for what it was, fragile, hollow, brittle. And that's why this moment mattered. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't scandal. It was a battle between dynasty and dignity. Arrogance and truth, and dignity won. If you believe dignity must always speak louder than dynasty. Share this story. If you believe truth must always stand taller than arrogance. Subscribe for more moments where power stumbles and courage rises, because in every chamber, on every stage, in every corner of America, the fight continues. And every time arrogance tries to drown out dignity, someone will stand, steady and unflinching, to remind us all, no last name is bigger than the truth. Cinematic close. Jasmine Crockett walking steady out of the chamber, the weight of victory light on her shoulders. Behind her, Ivanka sits frozen, smaller than ever, forgotten by a room that had already moved on. Truth walked out tall. Entitlement sat in silence. And the people watching knew exactly whose side they wanted to be on.